Hello and welcome to the English Podcast Lab. I'm Mike, and I'm thrilled you're joining us for this deep dive into English study tips. We've got a real expert with us today. It's Sarah. She's incredible when it comes to language learning, so we're lucky to have her to unpack all these tips you've gathered on how to boost your English skills. It looks like we've got a fantastic mix of strategies to explore, from those practical exercises to tech tools to even like the psychology of learning. So Sarah, just looking at all this advice, what jumps out at you?
Well, one thing that really strikes me is how much everyone talks about setting achievable goals, not just something vague like becoming fluent, but real concrete targets. So instead of thinking about this huge, overwhelming idea of fluency, you kind of break it down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Like imagine you want to understand your yoga instructor without constantly checking your dictionary. Or maybe you're aiming for a specific score on an English proficiency test.
Those are great goals to work towards. But honestly, one thing that always holds me back is that fear of messing up. It's like this big shadow over the whole learning process.
Well, that's completely understandable and a fear many learners share. But honestly, even native speakers make mistakes, especially when we're speaking quickly or maybe feeling a bit flustered. So the key is to find those low-stakes environments to practice in, places where you can experiment and make those little slip-ups without feeling self-conscious.
So, like, what kind of places are we talking about?
Well, think about language learning apps, online games, even just singing along to English songs. It all helps you get comfortable with the language.
That's a great point. I also noticed a lot of these resources talked about using what you learn immediately. It's that whole use it or lose it concept, right? Do you have any advice for how to actually put this into practice on a regular basis?
Absolutely. One super effective strategy is finding a language partner. If you're someone who thrives on structure, a course with regular interaction can be great. But even those more casual language exchanges can work wonders for your fluency.
I'm thinking about finding someone to chat with online, maybe.
Exactly. It's all about finding opportunities to actually use the language in real-life settings.
It makes sense. Another theme I noticed was weaving English learning into activities you already enjoy. So if you're a big cooking enthusiast, for example, you could try out English language cookbooks or maybe watch cooking shows. Or if history's your thing, exploring documentaries in English could be a really cool way to learn.
I think that's such a powerful approach. When you integrate English into activities that you already love, it stops feeling like work and becomes a natural part of your life.
So it's like you're learning without even realizing it.
Exactly. Imagine you're following a recipe from an English cookbook and suddenly realize you're understanding all the nuances and techniques without even trying. It's a really great feeling.
Definitely. Now, a challenge I think we all face when learning a new language is simply finding the time to study. Some of these resources recommend short bursts of practice, while others suggest longer study sessions. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a question a lot of people have, and the answer isn't always black and white. Research suggests that consistent, even short bursts of study are way more effective than those infrequent marathon sessions.
So it's about quality over quantity when it comes to study time.
Precisely. It's like the classic story of the tortoise and the hare, slow and steady, wins the race. It's about building that daily habit, even if it's just 15 minutes of focused practice.
Okay, I can see that. Now, for a more exciting prospect, what about traveling to an English-speaking country for immersive learning?
Oh, travel can be an incredible way to boost your language skills. It gives you a concrete goal to work towards and forces you to engage with the language in real, everyday situations.
And you get to create unforgettable memories while you're at it.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
Totally. And of course, we can't forget about all the online resources these days. We've got podcasts, YouTube channels, apps like Duolingo, so much to choose from. It can be overwhelming to navigate, though. Based on all this material, we've looked at any recommendations for what really works best in the online English learning world.
It really depends on your individual needs and learning style. Resources like the BBC Learning English website and app are excellent for a more traditional learning approach. Duolingo is fantastic if you enjoy gamified vocabulary building. And then there's Busuu, which offers a good mix of structured lessons and opportunities to interact with others.
So there's something for everyone.
Absolutely. Each platform has its own strengths and weaknesses, so it's about finding what resonates with you.
Makes sense. One resource that caught my eye was Preply, which seems to have a different approach.
Yeah, Preply really stands out because they emphasize personalized learning through one-on-one tutoring. It's all about creating customized learning plans, offering flexible scheduling, and most importantly, providing regular speaking practice.
That sounds super valuable, especially for someone who really wants that tailored experience.
Exactly. Having a dedicated tutor who can give you personalized feedback and support makes a huge difference in your progress.
Now, one tip that really intrigued me was this idea of labeling everyday objects around your house as a way to learn vocabulary. It seemed a little unconventional, but I'm curious if there are any other unusual but effective techniques like that.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorites is the Word of the Day challenge. Every day you choose a new word you've never seen before, look up its meaning, and then try to use it in conversations throughout the day.
I love that.
It's a fun and engaging way to expand your vocabulary naturally.
So it's about making learning a part of your daily routine. There was also a lot of emphasis on reading aloud to improve pronunciation. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, reading aloud is definitely a great way to practice pronunciation and become more comfortable with the sounds of the language. But there are other techniques that can be just as effective, like shadowing. Yeah, you listen to a native speaker. It could be from a movie, a TV show, a podcast, anything really. And then you try to mimic their pronunciation and intonation as closely as you can.
That sounds like a challenge.
It is, but it's a really fun way to fine-tune your accent and master those tricky sounds.
So it's like having a personal pronunciation coach right there in your ear.
Precisely.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground here, from setting goals and finding steady time to exploring different learning resources and techniques. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the most important takeaways are for our listeners.
Well, I think one of the most crucial things is that consistency is key. Even short bursts of daily practice are way more valuable than those sporadic cramming sessions.
It's all about building that habit.
Exactly. It's about making English a regular part of your routine.
Makes sense.
And another crucial point is to really embrace those mistakes as part of the learning process. They're not setbacks, they're actually stepping stones to fluency.
That's such a liberating way to think about it.
It's true. We all make mistakes. It's part of being human.
And finally, I think it's incredibly important to find ways to make learning English enjoyable.
Absolutely. Find ways to integrate it into things you already love, whether it's cooking, watching movies, listening to music, or chatting with friends. When you enjoy the process, it becomes so much easier to stay motivated and keep making progress.
I couldn't agree more. This has been a fantastic conversation. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening out there, we hope you've gleaned some valuable insights from this first part of our deep dive into English study tips. We'll be back soon with part 2, where we'll explore some even more advanced strategies and resources to take your English skills to that next level. Until then, happy learning.
Happy learning.
Welcome back to the English Podcast Lab. We're diving deeper into those English study tips with Sarah, our language learning expert. In the first part of our deep dive, we talked about some essential strategies like setting goals, finding time to study, embracing mistakes, and, making the learning process enjoyable. Now, Sarah, I'm excited to explore some more advanced techniques and resources, things that can help our listeners really take their English skills to that next level.
I'm happy to share some more ideas. Let's start by talking more about vocabulary acquisition. We touched on the Word of the Day challenge earlier, but there are so many creative and effective ways to expand your vocabulary.
I'm all ears.
One strategy that's really helpful is creating personalized vocabulary lists. Instead of just relying on those pre-made lists, the ones you find in textbooks, take some time to think about the words and phrases that are really relevant to your interests and your goals.
So if someone is really into travel, for example.
Exactly. They could create a list of travel-related vocabulary. Or if you're preparing for a job interview, you might focus on vocabulary specific to your field.
It's about making it meaningful, connecting those words to your own life.
Absolutely. And once you have your list, don't just passively review it. Really engage with those words, use them in sentences, try writing short stories, or even create flashcards with pictures and definitions.
It's about making those words stick.
Exactly. Another really powerful technique for vocabulary acquisition is to immerse yourself in English language content that you genuinely enjoy.
So we're talking about books, articles, movies, TV shows, podcasts, that kind of thing.
All of that. It could be anything, as long as you're enjoying it. And as you come across new words, Don't be shy about looking them up and adding them to your vocabulary list.
I love that. It's like turning your downtime into learning time.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the role of technology in learning English. I mean, there are so many amazing tools and resources available to us these days.
Absolutely. We briefly mentioned some popular language learning apps like Duolingo and Busuu, but there are so many others worth exploring. Have you heard of Memrise?
I have, yeah.
It uses this really cool technique called spaced repetition to help you memorize new vocabulary.
So it keeps going back to the words you're struggling with.
Right. And then there's Babbel, which offers interactive lessons that really focus on those practical communication skills.
So it's less about grammar rules and more about actually using the language.
Precisely. And then there's Rosetta Stone, which uses an immersive approach to teach you English through pictures, sounds, and real-life scenarios.
Wow, it's amazing how many options there are.
It really is.
Yeah.
And beyond language learning apps, there are countless other online resources that can be incredibly valuable. Websites like the British Council's Learn English and the Voice of America's Learning English offer a wealth of free resources.
What kind of resources?
Well, they have everything from grammar lessons and vocabulary exercises to listening comprehension activities.
Those sound really useful, especially for learners who might be on a budget. And of course, we can't forget about social media.
You're right, social media is a fantastic tool for language learning.
Like how so?
Well, platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram can be great ways to connect with other English learners and native speakers. You can practice your writing skills, stay updated on current events, and just generally immerse yourself in the language.
It's all about finding those opportunities to use English in your everyday life, both online and offline.
Exactly.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about pronunciation. Earlier, we discussed shadowing as a technique for improving pronunciation, but I'm wondering if you have any other tips.
Of course. One technique that I find incredibly helpful is to record yourself speaking English and then listen back to the recording.
So it's about becoming aware of how you actually sound.
Exactly. It might feel a little strange at first, but it's a really effective way to identify those areas where you might be stumbling or where your pronunciation could be clearer.
So it's like having another set of ears, an objective listener, to help you pinpoint those tricky sounds.
That's a great way to put it. Another helpful tip is to pay close attention to the rhythm and intonation of English speech.
Rhythm and intonation.
Yeah. You know, English is what we call a stress-timed language, which means that certain syllables are emphasized more than others.
So it's not just about pronouncing the individual words correctly, but also about the music of the language.
You got it. By listening carefully to native speakers and trying to mimic their rhythm and intonation, you can make your English sound much more natural and fluent.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's tackle the grammar beast. Grammar can be a bit of a challenge for many English language learners.
I understand that completely. But it's important to remember that grammar is simply the set of rules that govern how language works. And once you grasp those rules, you can really start to use them to your advantage.
So what are some effective ways to improve your grammar skills?
Well, one approach is to take a structured grammar course. This can give you a really solid foundation in the fundamentals of English grammar. Another option is to use online resources like grammar websites and apps.
Oh, there are tons of those.
I know, right? They can be really helpful. They often offer interactive exercises and clear explanations that can help you learn and practice grammar rules in a more engaging way.
So it's not just about memorizing rules from a textbook.
Exactly. And of course, there's always the tried and true method of reading and writing.
The classic approach.
It works. By reading extensively in English, you'll naturally start to internalize those patterns and structures of the language.
It's like osmosis.
Kind of. And by writing regularly, you'll have the opportunity to put your grammar knowledge into practice and really see how it all comes together.
Those are all great suggestions. Now, I'd love to talk about listening comprehension. It's such a crucial part of language acquisition.
Absolutely. After all, if you can't understand what people are saying, it's really hard to communicate effectively.
Well, how can we improve our listening skills?
One of the most effective ways is to immerse yourself in as much authentic English as possible. And I really want to emphasize the word authentic here.
Me.
We're talking about listening to how native speakers actually use the language, not just those scripted textbook dialogues.
So things like movies, TV shows, podcasts, audiobooks.
Yes, all of that. And don't be afraid to start with content that's a little bit below your level. It's better to understand most of what you're hearing than to struggle with something that's too difficult.
That's a really good point. It's about building confidence and gradually increasing the difficulty.
Exactly. Another helpful tip is to focus on the overall meaning of what you're hearing, rather than getting stuck on individual words that you might not understand. Try to identify those key ideas and the speaker's main points.
It's about seeing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. And finally, never hesitate to ask for clarification if you don't understand something. It's completely normal to need to ask questions, and it's a great way to learn.
It's all part of the learning process, right?
Absolutely.
This has been another incredibly insightful conversation, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we hope you've gained some valuable tips and strategies for leveling up your English skills. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll wrap things up with some closing thoughts and motivational advice to keep you inspired on your language learning journey. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the English Podcast Lab for the final part of our deep dive into English study tips. We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, from setting goals and mastering vocabulary to honing your pronunciation, grammar, and listening comprehension skills. Now, Sarah, as we wrap things up, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what it really takes to succeed in learning English.
Well, I think one of the most important things is to remember that language learning is a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, moments of frustration, and moments of triumph. But the key is to stay motivated, keep practicing, and never give up on your goals.
That's so important. It's easy to get discouraged when you hit a roadblock, but it's crucial to remember those setbacks are a natural part of the process.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways to stay motivated is to find ways to make learning enjoyable. We've talked about integrating English into your hobbies and interests, but it's also important to celebrate your successes along the way.
It's easy to get caught up in focusing on the end goal that we forget to acknowledge the progress we're making.
Exactly. So take the time to recognize your achievements, no matter how small they may seem.
Another key aspect of success in language learning is to create a supportive environment for yourself.
Surround yourself with people who encourage and support your goals, find a language partner, join a study group, and don't be afraid to reach out for help when you need it.
That's such valuable advice. We all need a little support and encouragement along the way.
Absolutely. And finally, I think it's important to remember that learning English can open up a world of opportunities. It can enhance your career prospects, broaden your horizons, and connect you with people from all over the globe.
It's a truly empowering skill to have.
It certainly is.
This has been an incredible deep dive, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, we hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Remember, the key to success in learning English is to stay motivated, keep practicing, and never stop exploring. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into English study tips, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more language learning tips and tricks, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, happy learning.